Did they get the boat out of the river yet, David?
I didn't see it tonight when I came home.
Yeah, it was quite sunk.
It made me
Yep.
go,
Oh, we're live. Good.
Okay. It is 7 o'clock. We have quorum here, everyone in attendance. So I will call this meeting to order. And I do want to start off that you may have noticed that the flags in Lambton Shores have been lowered to half mast. Tonight, we are saddened with the loss of our Ward 5 councillor, Rick Goodhand. Councillor Goodhand had a passion for good discussion and working for his constituents. He will be missed by council and his community. Rick has left a legacy. In 2014, he was inducted into the Sarnia Lambton Sports Hall of Fame. In honor of this dedication to youth baseball and numerous other organizations. Rick was a proud founding member of the Tri-Sport Forest Games. That's just a couple examples of how this community will remember Coach Rick. The family invites you to a drive-by service Saturday, June the 27th, and details for that can be found at forestfuneralhome.com. Our sincere condolences to Sarah Jane and Rick's entire family from the Council of Lambton Shores. But thank you, Rick, for your dedication to your community. Thank you. I would ask that anyone has a pecuniary interest, conflict of interest, to declare it now.
I do. Item 7.31, the planning report for Ross Lichty. I'm within the appeal area for that notice, so I will declare a conflict when that comes up.
Okay. So noted by the.
Yep.
Any other conflict? Seeing none. Item 3 is approve of the agenda with the addition of the CAO report 05 as 10.9. Councillor Scott?
I have a question before we approve that. With the CAO report coming through for 10.3, the new insertion, does that negate my motion at all?
I believe not. Your notice of motion is to be dealt with at the July 14th meeting.
Okay, so it's not a report that's going to change my motion at all? Like, it's not going to come back and say, oh, well, we've had a report and that motion won't stand?
That
Okay, thank you. I'm prepared.
motion, still a notice of motion to come back at the next.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
I'd like to move the agenda then.
with that addition at 10.9, the CAO report, second by Councillor Sageman. Any question, discussion? All in favor of that? That's carried. Thank you. We have no items on number 4 for a closed session. Number 5 is a recommendation of the minutes from June the 2nd. Recommendation to be adopted as presented. A mover and a seconder for those minutes. Councillor Wilcox and Councillor Meyer. Questions on those minutes? All in favor of those minutes? That's carried. Councillor reports. Councillor Scott.
I have had the pleasure of talking to, as well as I know that you've had, a number of the gypsy moth things. That's been about the topic of conversation in our area for the last 4 or 5 weeks. So we'll be talking about that at a later date, but that's it for this, councillor.
Any other council reports? We've all been staying home. We don't have events to talk about going to and that type of thing. So that is makes quiet council reports. I will comment on Lambton Shores moving to stage 2 and the opening of patios. The opening of our beach was yesterday. We raised the blue flag. Our spray pads are now open, so it's a good move forward. Some things to do for people in the community, and better for our businesses that are able to have meals on the patio. So with that, though, comes the hope that people will still follow and respect the guidelines by the medical officer of health. So the message that we want to make sure is come and enjoy, but do it safely. We did hear news today of Sauble Beach reclosing, so we don't want to go there. So we'll have to try to get everything. And I would like to mention that at this time to all our staff, the staff that have gotten the beach ready, the staff that are trying to deal with other areas, getting washrooms set up and all of that stuff. They've gone exceptional to make things work, get things put together. It's been a busy and stressful time for our staff, and I think they're doing a fantastic job. And I think that needs to be mentioned, that everybody's under a level of stress that is higher, dealing with issues. So I will leave it at that, but we have great teams working out there for us. So I hope the department heads that are here pass that along to everyone. So.
You're here.
So we're going to try something new now with our Zoom meeting. We have statutory public meetings. There's a recommendation there that we move to public meetings pursuant to section 16 and 34 of the Planning Act 190 P13 as amended. We have that motion, and that'll be for all of the public meetings in one motion. Councillor Sageman and Councillor Wilcox, all in favor of that? That is carried. Thank you. We'll go to 7.1, which is a public meeting for a zone amendment on 24 Shady Lane, Planning Report 14. And I will let the clerk let me know when people are here that have asked to be part of the public presentation.
We have Steve Brunel in attendance, and he's at the meeting now.
Okay, and our planner is here. So as this is the public portion, I would ask that the planner present this report, and there is a recommendation with the report. So Will.
Thank you, and good evening. So this is a property at the end of Shady Lane in Grand Bend. It's important to understand that this property currently consists of 3 separately conveyable deeds. The Committee of Adjustment has granted applications that allow a realignment of those lots to make the frontage, the widths more even. Part of that severance process will also grant the municipality some additional land for the road allowance to provide a little bit better area to turn around at the end, increase the road surface. This particular zoning application, the property is currently zoned for multiple residential dwellings, and the rezoning would change the zoning to single family dwellings. And with site-specific zoning provisions, so those would be reduced front yard setbacks, 1.2 meter side yard setbacks, larger than normal rear yard setbacks to reflect the setback requirements of the Conservation Authority, and also reduced lot widths, reduced lot frontage, recognizing that the portion of the lots that actually abuts the road is only 3 meters in some cases. So that is the purpose of the zoning amendments. There will be a development agreement coming forward to council if this is approved to to reflect the infrastructure improvements that would be made within the new road allowance as part of the development. And so staff has drafted a bylaw that would change the zoning to a R4 zone, similar to the other properties around it, but a zone exception, so R44, with some of these site-specific provisions as I described.
Okay, thank you for that. Steve, the applicant?
Yeah.
Yes, so Steve, as the applicant, you get to go next. Any comments regarding the application?
Okay, I'm just unmuting. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, thank you very much for having me. I think Will has presented the application fairly well. Effectively, I'm trying to set out 3 single dwelling lots. I have interest in them. I think it's in the best interest of our neighborhood. You all know in the village, it's pretty tight. And with the existing zoning of R3 multi-unit, there is the potential for putting townhouses or other things in here. I don't think that's in the best interest of the town nor the neighborhood. I'd like to convey to everyone that I am the direct neighbor here. So I am on the adjoining property to the east on lot 27. I am trying very hard to accommodate the needs of my neighbors who live upriver, and hence these setbacks on the river are the best way that we can provide for sightlines for, I think, the sunsets that everybody is well aware of are quite valued for all the property owners that are upriver from me. So that's been in the mix here, and that's part of the discussion that I've had with the planners, with Will, and with ABCA. So all of that is included in this mission. And again, I think Will has set it out quite clearly, so it wouldn't be for me to add anything to muddle it up.
Okay. Thank you. Any members of council with any questions regarding this? Seeing none, and public was notified that this was how they had to join, and everybody had the opportunity for joining in.
That is correct. Notices were sent out in accordance with the act as they normally are. We did ask people to contact me in advance of the meeting to register if they wish to speak, and we had no registrations for this public meeting.
Great, thank you. If there is no further comments, we do have the recommendation here. Can we make the motions for the recommendation in the part of the public meeting?
Let's leave them till after.
We'll leave those recommendations till after, but seeing that there's no other, we will go on and switch to the next meeting. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the support of the planning department and ABCA. Thank you. Thank you, councilors. Thank you, Mayor.
Bear with me for a moment.
Yep, we'll get switched over to Kim Heathcote. This was a zoning bylaw amendment 07 of 8543 Goose Marsh Line. And we're getting connected to audio. There you are. Hello, and I will him, but I will turn it over. This meeting is for application for zone amendment bylaw. I would ask the planner to present the application. You're on mute. Nope. There you go.
My space bar wasn't working because I had my cursor over a different program open. sorry, for this application, it's the purpose of the application is to create a secondary dwelling on the property. It's a agricultural zone and agricultural designation, but it is a residential area in character. Provincial policy is encouraging, or more so requiring us to allow secondary dwellings in appropriate circumstances. So the comments we've received regarding septic is that the lot is adequately sized for 2 units. The location of the house is not ideal, in my opinion. However, there are some mitigating factors. It's a much wider boulevard there than normal. There is some screening from existing vegetation. There's not a lot of neighbors really close by, but the real deciding factor in my mind that we can support that location is the fact that there was a unit there in the past, and so all the servicing and septic system associated with that past unit are there, and the unit would be a park model home, but not strictly speaking a park model home. It's been modified, it's been winterized, it's had an addition added onto it. There are pictures in the report that show the actual unit, so it's in good condition. It's not obviously just a box shaped like a normal park model home. So under the conditions, we can support the application. The zoning amendment, as you would see it in your bylaws section, is to create an A211 zone, so a site-specific A2 zone that recognizes the existing dwelling, allows a second dwelling, states that it may be a modified park model home, and then also recognizes the location of the secondary unit in the front yard at 6 meters from the front property line and 1.2 meters side yard.
Okay. Does the applicant, Kim, do you have any comments to add to that presentation?
I'm just appreciative of how good everyone has been to work with Will, and also with the county. Neighbors, I think, are all in support. Mom and Dad have been on this road for 55 years, and we'd like to bring them back home and let them enjoy the rest of their life here on Goose Marsh.
Okay. Again, the notice was sent to neighbors and everyone was given the opportunity to participate. And at this time, we had no others. Any members of council with questions or comments regarding this? Dr. McGuire.
Yes, Your Worship. The only question I have is to the planner. It talks in the report about a Sandpoint well. Obviously, would that be a lake water hookup? Do we allow well hookups in the municipality?
Actually, is that a question that Steve McCauley could address? I don't believe that hookups are mandatory if existing lot is serviced by a private well. I don't believe that it's mandatory that it hook up.
I see Mr. McCauley has popped onto the screen.
Through you, Your Worship, what the planner said is correct. It's not mandatory, although most people eventually come knocking for a hookup, but it isn't mandatory.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Yes, Your Worship, one for the planner. Is this a precedent setting?
Yes, so that is a question that crossed my mind as well. And I think it's really unfortunate. We have a number of issues within the municipality that really do need to be addressed through a zoning bylaw update. It would be nice to have a policy in place for these secondary units. Unfortunately, that will wait until the zoning review is completed, and that is underway. In the meantime, we are forced to deal with the provincial policies and their requirements that we entertain these secondary units. We're required to deal with that on a case-by-case basis. So it would be nice if we had a policy in place. Do we allow them on septic systems? Do we allow secondary units in agricultural areas? Those types of issues. We don't at the present. The fact that this one is located in the front yard as it is as well, I'm not thrilled with it, as I said. And so I want to be very clear in the report as to the reasons why I can support it, because I don't necessarily want that to become the standard for all future ones coming forward. I don't think we're necessarily at the point where we want to say that we're going to allow them in agricultural zones across the board. So I think we have to come to terms as to the situations where we will allow them as of right. But even in that circumstance, there will be situations where we'll have to look at exceptions on a case-by-case basis. So I think this one is a little bit more of an exceptional situation, and I hope it doesn't become the standard that we go by. And I was tried to be clear in my report as to why I supported those circumstances in this case.
Thank you.
Councillor Sageman. Oh, okay. If there's no other comments, we will, because we're in a public meeting, we can't make the motion for the recommendation that's there. And I guess I did have a question on the recommendation. Its recommendation be approved, and I guess the condition was of the health unit and the septic, and that's not the septic system replacing the tank with a larger tank. Is that part of the recommendation, or is that part of the condition in the bylaw? I should have looked.
So with a zoning bylaw, we can't put conditions on a zoning bylaw. We can either pass it or defer it until conditions have been met. In this case, it will be required as part of the building permit process. The building permit process will take care of that issue.
Okay, thank you. As long as we're clear on that. If there's no further questions, thank you, Kim. You can stay tuned. We'll be dealing with the recommendations following the public meeting when we close the public meetings. We'll move on to the next one. This is on 7352 Arcona Road. And I believe this Mayor Cook has declared conflict with this one. We'll get the people switched over that we need to be here. Okay.
Ross, are you there?
Hello.
Hello, Ross. I think we have you on your iPhone, so as long as you're able to hear us.
Yep, that's good.
Okay. So this is the application for 7352 Arcona Road. And I would ask the planner to present the application.
Thank you. So with this application, the property in Arcona at the north end of the downtown, there is an existing house which we presume to be legal non-conforming. The property is designated as commercial in the official plan. It's zoned commercial C1 in the zoning bylaw. The applicant would like to tear down and replace the existing house. He cannot do that because the current C1 zone does not list a single detached dwelling as a permitted use. Some commercial zones do recognize existing single detached dwellings, in which case in those zones, a house like this could be replaced. Not so in this situation or this particular zone. The official plan does permit the municipality to pass bylaws to recognize existing legal non-conforming uses. In the circumstances, we can support that request. We want to be clear that we do care about the health and the revitalization of downtown areas. And we don't want this to appear as being contrary to that. But as outlined in the report, we do feel there it's better to focus on the existing physical commercial spaces we have, and that there are other vacant lots in the commercial area that are more important. And also that having lots that are zoned residential within a commercial designation is not new. There's other examples right in Arkona itself, across the road, in fact, and in some of the other communities. So the zoning bylaws, you would see it in your bylaws section, is very simple. It's just change the zone designation from C1 to R1.
Okay, thank you. The applicant, Ross, do you have any comments further to that?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. We do have one.
No.
Okay.
No, it's wrong.
Okay, I thought we had a piece of correspondence, but we don't. Is there any, I think, just again, we asked that everyone was circulated with the proper notice on this. So seeing no other comments, council has any other questions, we will move on. Thank you, Ross. We'll be dealing with this after we get out of the public meeting. We can't make motions during a public meeting, so we'll close our public meeting and do the application thereafter, and you can follow along on the live streaming. So,
Okay, thanks.
okay, thank you. And we'll move on to our next item, the public meeting zoning for Richard Beans, 7975 Kennedy Line. So I will.
Deputy Mayor Cook back.
And Deputy Mayor Cook can come back in. There he is.
I think these are present yet. I'm not certain they're coming. We could switch around. We have the applicants for the next the rice application.
We're going to change this. The Beans have not joined in or not available to connect right at the minute. So to give them the opportunity, we are going to go to step one, which is the application for the official plan amendment to the Rice Development Company at 77 Main Street East. If there's Roger. Welcome.
And Michael Clark is joining us as well.
And Michael is joining as well. Is he online now?
Yes. No video, Michael?
Oh,
There he is.
there he is. Both with the microphones muted. I hope you can hear us. And I would ask the planner to present this official plan amendment application and zoning and bylaw for Rice Development. Will?
Thank you again. So this application relates to the last property in the municipalities you head out on Main Street East on the left-hand side, 2.5 acre property. There's 2 blocks there, both commercial, between Tattersall Lane and the end of the municipality. So this is the easterly of the 2. The intention with this zoning and official plan amendment change is basically just to grant a little bit more flexibility in the permitted uses. Currently, they permit only commercial uses. This would allow an apartment dwelling on this 2.5 acre block as well. So the official plan amendment would change the designation from commercial to mixed use and add policies explaining that commercial uses as well as apartments are permitted, and setting out some development criteria, including proper separations and screening from residential lands to the north. The zoning bylaw amendment would keep the property in the C16 zone as it currently is, permitting those commercial uses, but making a zone exception, so the C16-2 zone, allowing also multiple dwellings, whether as a independent building as a multiple dwelling or as apartments over top of a building with commercial uses on the main floor or floors. The zoning would allow a height of up to 4 stories for an apartment building. The rear yard setback would be is something that we discussed with the applicants. It would be based on the height of the building. So the rear yard would face the residential lots, the future residential lots to the north. The required setback from those lands would be reflected by the height of the building. And potentially if the building were multiple stories, the taller stories could be stepped back from the property line and the shorter stories could be closer to the property line, the way it's been drafted. So I'll allow the applicant to explain the application further, but that explains how the official plan amendment and the zoning amendment have been drafted as you see them in the bylaws section. And just a note as well, official plan amendments, once adopted by municipal council, are forwarded to the county to be approved. And once those are approved and come into effect, excuse me, once the official plan comes into effect, then the zoning bylaw also comes into effect retroactively, so to speak.
Okay, the applicants wish to speak to this.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Will, for your support of this application. I guess we support the recommendations of the planner to approve the application. I would just add that through our consultations with municipal staff, we originally were coming in for a larger area, and we reduced it to address some concerns about ensuring there continues to be a sufficient supply of commercial land that will for sure stay commercial in the municipality. But there may be an appropriate time to look at those lands in the future. And as Will said, we worked with him to address the setbacks so that any apartment buildings, and we're only proposing up to 4 stories, that those would be set back sufficiently from the future residential lots to the north. But we're available for any questions if council have. Thanks.
Okay. Are there any questions of council members? Deputy Mayor Cook.
I guess, so just what type of, I guess, infilling or I guess increased living are we looking at, going from single into the multi-use or multi-residential? What type of numbers are we looking at family-wise, I guess?
Did you want to address that, Michael?
Sure, yeah. Thank you to Your Worship. The zoning, if it was developed entirely for multi-residential units, the lot is just under a hectare, and so it would permit about 66 apartment units. There would obviously be slightly less if it was residential above commercial uses, just to deal with parking and other uses, but that would be the maximum number of units that it could permit.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Again, we note that it was circulated and people had the opportunity to sign in and be part of the public process. So,
Sorry, Bill.
Sorry?
Just follow. So are these going to be rental or condo units to be sold?
To your worship, at the moment, there's no exact design proposals. Basically, these lots have been marketed as commercial lots for several decades, as you guys are aware, and there hasn't been sufficient interest to develop them. And so Rice and Roger are exploring the residential component to hopefully see some more activity on those sites. They feel there's demand for those types of apartment units, but there's no concrete plans in place yet.
Roger?
Yeah, if I could just add to that, we have another apartment block within the subdivision that is proposed for a rental apartment building. At this point, this particular subject block, we're looking at a small condo units for this as opposed to rental. So we would have both buildings potentially proposed. We wanted to get this zoning in place so that we could get out to the market. We could put some plans together and just see if there's a market for these smaller, more affordable condo units. So that's the plan at this point.
Okay, Councillor Dodge.
Yeah, question for the planner. Just on the notice of apartments and commercial, there's sufficient parking for this endeavor?
Yes, the zoning bylaw requires 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit. So as was mentioned, there's no firm plans or designs in place. There were some concepts shown in the justification report, but all the development of this site would require site plan approval, and that process would ensure that sufficient parking is provided for all the uses that may be provided, whether it's apartments only, or whether there's a mix of commercial as well as residential. We would make sure that there is adequate parking as part of the site plan approval process.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. If there's nothing else, we will come back to the recommendation when we've had a few public meetings here together. So when we get to the end of this and close our public meeting, we'll deal with the recommendation. So stay tuned on the live stream, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We'll move back to Richard Beans. Are they available?
They haven't logged in. It's not necessary that they're
No.
present for the meeting.
Okay. So we'll deal with zoning 04, 7975 Kennedy Line, Richard Bean. I'd ask the planner to present this application for consideration.
The Veen application is a rural lot of approximately 2 acres on Kennedy Line. There are 2 existing houses on the property. The original Century Home and another house that was moved in onto a new foundation. So I believe it was 5 years ago, the property owner, this is several property owners ago, took out permits for the construction of the new house and the demolition of the existing house. The project was abandoned, and so the building permits were canceled, and so the property currently sits in a non-conforming condition. The new owners, as I said, it's been several owners since, they wish to make use of both houses for migrant workers. And again, this is a situation where we're talking about provincial policies encouraging secondary houses. We're also talking about issues of the official plan permitting accommodations required for farm labor. So migrant labor is a normal form of labor for this type of agriculture. The applicants are fruit farmers. So the way the zoning bylaw has been drafted, is to basically permit a secondary single detached dwelling. So it would allow 2 dwellings. It would allow them to be used as single detached dwellings, but it would also allow them to be used for migrant labor housing. And that's the way the bylaw was drafted. I thought that would be the simplest way to do it, especially considering that in the future, the need for migrant labor housing may disappear, and then it's very likely that the houses would become for that use, for single detached dwellings. So that is the way it was drafted. Now we have received correspondence that indicates that the person corresponding has no issues with the 2 houses being used for migrant worker housing, but does not want to see each house used as a single detached house for 2 separate families. As I said, provincial policy is encouraging us to allow secondary houses. It doesn't necessarily require us to do that in agricultural areas where we're not encouraging new non-farm growth. So if council agrees with those comments that were received that it shouldn't be used for 2 houses, then we would have to defer a decision and bring back a redrafted bylaw to the effect that a second house would only be permitted if used as migrant labor housing. That presents the problem of, if migrant labor housing use ceases, how do we police how the use is used in the future if it's used as a single detached dwelling? So I think Stephanie was going to read that correspondence.
Okay.
Or I can do that if you prefer, Stephanie.
You want to read that?
Yeah. So we did receive correspondence yesterday from Dieter Wolf, and the correspondence reads as follows. With regards to this property and its potential use, I have no issue with both houses to be used to house migrant workers for the farms. I do, however, have an issue or concern that it could be used at some point in future as a multi-dwelling, multi-family rental property. I certainly don't wish for that to happen, as I would think many others would have the same opinion. Wording or such should be put in place to allow farm migrant housing use, but not multi-family, multi-dwelling rental. Thank you, Mr. Dieter Wolf.
Okay. Thanks for that correspondence. Comments, council, questions? Councillor Dodge.
Yes, for the planner, the letter states it's okay. For the Wolves are saying it's okay for migrant farm workers, but they have a concern if it ceases, and can that not be put into this? So basically that wording, if they want to revert back to single dwellings, they would have to come before the council of the day to have that decision reached.
Yeah, so the way the zoning bylaw is drafted now, it would allow either house to be used as either a single detached dwelling or migrant labor housing, either or. If we want to make it such that both dwellings could only be occupied if used as migrant housing, we would have to defer a decision and bring back a different bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Scott.
In the future, we are, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Will, in the future, we're looking at having granny flats and available buildings on property. Is that not correct? Isn't that part of the PPS now?
Yes, that is part of the provincial mandate, although not necessarily for agricultural areas. That is an area of discretion to the municipality, in my mind. So the comments that were received may be reflective of an attitude that's a little bit contrary in general to the provincial direction. But But as I said, the provincial direction does not necessarily force us to allow secondary dwellings in every situation. There are situations where secondary dwellings could be legitimately prohibited. For instance, areas where there's servicing issues or lots are insufficient size for septic systems, or agricultural areas in general, if we just feel we don't want to be promoting additional residential uses in agricultural areas. So there's some degree of flexibility there. And as I was saying earlier, it would be nice if we did have a policy in place, but we're left at present to deal with these applications on a case-by-case basis.
Follow up, Councillor Scott.
So if we were to, in the future, look at this as a granny flat situation, being two separate homes, is the septic system, because I think they put in a new one. I looked at this property with a friend when it was owned by the bank. They were interested in putting an offer in on it. And there was a brand new septic system that was part of the deal that was in there already. So is it because there's only one septic system, or is there two? Is there two there, or is it a large enough septic system for both?
I'm not sure exactly what was there when the owners acquired it. They have, however, installed a new septic system that is sufficiently sized to accommodate both dwellings.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Deputy Mayor Cook.
Thank you. Through you to the planner. So I guess the wording in the agreement would have to be, or do we determine whether it's got to be for all seasonal workers, or can one be for one house just be for seasonal? Is that the way we're interpreting it right now?
So the bylaw as drafted would allow either house to be used in either way. One could be used for one and one for the other, or both could be used for migrant housing, or both could be used as single detached. That is how it's drafted at present. I thought that would be most likely to avoid any practical problems in the future, provide the most flexibility. But if we do not want to provide that flexibility, we can amend the bylaw, or not amend the bylaw, but redraft the amendment to say what we want it to say.
Follow up.
Yeah, so basically, they could rent one if they didn't want to have migrant workers. One could be a rental house. Is that what the zoning would permit going forward if we approve this the way it's written now?
I would say yes, it would.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions with that? Seeing none, we will move on, and I would ask for a motion to close the public meetings for all of the preceding meetings that we have. Moved by Councillor Sageman, second by Councillor Scott. All in favor of closing the public meeting? That is carried. Now we have all the recommendations from each of those, and we could move them all in one group, but that would eliminate Deputy Mayor Cook. Do we want to do each one separate?
I like them separate.
Okay, we'll go back and start with the
Shady Lane.
Shady Lane one, which is 7.1, planning report 14. The recommendation that it be received and rezoned and be approved. Is there a motion dealing with Shady Lane? Councillor McGuire and Councillor Sageman. Any questions regarding that? All in favor of that? That is carried. Thank you. Planning report 16. This is for the 8543 Goose Marsh application for a second single detached dwelling be approved. Bylaw 32, Councillor Dodge and Councillor Sageman. All in favor of that? That's carried. Thank you. Item 7.3, which is the 7352 Arcona Road. I see Deputy Mayor Cook has left the screen. And there's a recommendation there on that application that it be approved and bylaw 29 be approved. Motion by Councillor Marsh, second by Councillor McGuire. Questions? All in favor of that? That is carried. Mayor Cook, may come back. Item 741, which is the one that we just recently dealt with on 7975 Kennedy Line. And the recommendation is there that it be approved and bylaw 30 be approved. Councillor Wilcox, seconded by Councillor Dodge. Questions regarding that? In favor of that? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. 751 is the official plan amendment for 77 Main Street East in Grand Bend. This is the official plan and zoning amendment from Rice Development. Recommendation be received, the official plan be approved, and the zoning amendment be approved. Councillor McGuire, seconded by Councillor Satesman. Any questions regarding that? Being none, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. I believe that has got us through our planning and public meetings. So, that is great. We now have a presentation, and I know our auditor has been waiting patiently. So I ask that our clerk allow them into our meeting. Jordan and Peter, and is Tyler joining as well?
Yep, there he is.
Jordan is going to be sharing his screen.
Okay. Welcome. I'll let you present the audited financial statements.
Can you see the presentation right now?
Yes.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and take it away, Pete?
Okay, can you hear me? I think I just unmuted.
No, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, great. Well, thanks for having us here tonight to go over the draft statements. I'm Pete Barnes. I'm a partner in the Sarnia office of BDO, and I brought with me Jordan Rudanich, who's a manager in our office, and Tyler Steckley, who was the audit senior on the job this year. So the next slide, Jordan, shows what we're going to talk about tonight. Jordan's going to go over the financial statement highlights, and Tyler will run through the final report to those charged with governance. So just a quick update on the status of the audit. Once the statements are approved, we still need to perform subsequent events work up to today's date. We're still waiting on a confirmation from the Pinery, and we require a management rep letter signed and returned to us, which Janet has. We sent that to her today. So what you're going to see in a minute when Jordan goes through the slides that the municipality had another strong financial year. So I'll just pass it over to Jordan.
All right, thanks, Pete. So to get started with taking a look at your financial statement package, we're going to take a look at the independent auditors report, which is on the third page of your financial statement package, or the first page after the table of contents. So in the auditor's report, it details the opinion, basis for the opinion, responsibilities of management and those charged with governance for the consolidated financial statements, as well as our responsibilities for the audit of the consolidated financial statements. The independent auditors report is unchanged from the prior year. So for Lambton Shores, it's our opinion that the accompanying consolidated financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the municipality as at December 31st, 2019, and its results of operations, its change in net assets, and its cash flows for the year ended in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. So in other words, a clean audit opinion for Lambton Shores. On the second page of your independent auditors report, you may notice that the date details that it's to be determined. So after today, after the statements are approved today's date will be put there for the audited statements. So the next slide. So over the course of this presentation, we'll be touching on two major statements. The consolidated statement of financial position. We'll take a look at the financial assets and the variances there. We'll take a look at financial liabilities and its variance as well, and we'll focus in on long-term debt. This is found on page 3 of your financial statement package. And then we'll take a look at page 4, which is the consolidated statement of operations. We'll take a look at variances for revenues as well as expenses. All right, so the next slide. So financial assets. So this slide here shows the financial asset trends over the past 3 years. As you might notice, you can see that financial assets have been building over the past 3 years. It's gone from $28.2 million in 2017 to about $36.4 million in 2019. So that's a $8.1 million increase from 2017, or 29%. So that's a great result. So the difference from prior year has to do with a significant increase in the cash balance, which you can see here. All the other financial asset accounts have remained relatively consistent, with the exception of long-term receivables, which have decreased from last year. So long-term receivables consist of long-term receivable with the Pinery for construction and use of an extension of the municipality's sewage system. So each year, the Pinery pays off a portion of that debt owed to Lambton Shores each year. So you can see it's been decreasing over the past 3 years. Cash and cash equivalents has increased significantly from last year. And to see that, you'll want to flip to page 5 of your financial statement package. And if you do, you'll see that the reasoning behind why cash has increased so significantly is largely as a result of the annual surplus of almost $5 million generated during the year, as well as increase in deferred revenue, which we'll take a look at in the next slide, and decreases when you compare capital purchases from prior years. So the next slide, financial liabilities, details financial liabilities and its changes over the past 3 years. You can see that it's remained relatively consistent with past years, and the reasonings behind that have to do with accounts payable and accrued liabilities decreasing from last year, long-term debt also decreasing, but offset by increases in deferred revenue during the year. So accounts payable and accrued liabilities have decreased from last year, and that mainly has to do with timing of payments and activity at year end. Long-term debt continues to decrease as payments are made on the debt that Lambton Shores has, and deferred revenue has increased from last year. So the reasoning behind the increase in deferred revenue has to do with community vibrancy funds, which the Lambton Shores municipality receives every year. So that continues to build, as well as some development charges for new construction and unspent grant monies related to the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, as well as the federal gas tax. There were some top-up funds paid from federal gas tax, and so that's been added to deferred as it hasn't been spent. So deferred revenues are monies that the municipality has received but not spent in accordance with the conditions placed in that money. Details of deferred revenue can be found on note 4 of your financial statement package, or pages 13 and 14. So the next slide details long-term debt. So overall, with long-term debt, you can see over the past 5 years, it's gone from $14.2 million to about $9.2 million in 2019. So that's an over $5 million decrease over the past 5 years. If you take a look at percentages, that's going to be a 35% decrease over the past 5 years. So that's great. The next slide shows long-term debt and the repayments over the next number of years. For 2020, there's an expected principal repayment of $1.24 million. Details of long-term debt can be found on note 5 of your financial statement package, and it's on page 15 and 16. So the next slide here shows a total accumulated surplus and tangible capital asset in thousands of dollars. So you can see the trend here for accumulated surplus has been increasing over the past 3 years. Accumulated tangible capital assets have increased but decreased a little bit at the end of 2019. So the tangible capital assets and its details can be found in note number 6 of your financial statement package, or pages 17 and 18. at the end of 2019, tangible capital assets amounted to $196.4 million. Accumulated surplus has been building over the past few years, and at the end of 2019, it amounts to $212,000. Details of the accumulated surplus can be found on note 7 of your financial statement package or on page 19. The next slide here details reserve and reserve funds. So you can see the trend over the past 5 years for reserve and reserve funds are an increasing trend line. You can see that it's gone from $13.8 million in 2015 to $25.6 million in 2019. So that's an increase of $11.8 million. And just when we compare 2018 to 2019, there's a $5.2 million increase. So that's great there. The next slide here details revenues. When you compare budgeted revenues versus actual revenues, you can see that actual revenues are slightly less than budgeted revenues. It's less by about $3,000, or a difference of 0.01%. Most of that difference has to do with the actual grant revenue accounts being less than budgeted, but this has been offset by other revenue. So the decrease in government grant revenue versus budgeted has to do a lot with the amounts that were set up in deferred revenue, which we've talked about when we looked at the liability slide there. As well, there were some delays with the Forest King Street and Main Street projects, which reduced some connecting links grant funding, which brought in grant revenue a little bit less than expected. Other revenue is much greater than budgeted as a result of one being your reserve and reserve funds increasing so significantly during the year. With that increase, you're going to have some investment income that wasn't budgeted for. As well, there was an assumption of some assets that amounted to $235,000, which weren't budgeted for either. So in the end, you end up with a budgeted versus actual figures, which are pretty close to one another. Taking a look at revenue by type and broken down in a pie chart format, you can, this pie chart here is very similar results to what the municipality has seen in the past. You can see taxation revenue makes up about 43% of revenue, user fees 32%, provincial grants 13%, and other revenue 9% at the end of 2019. The next slide here details expenses and by function, and details budgeted expenses versus actual. Actual expenses came in less than budgeted by about $1.76 million, or 6.73%. So overall, you can see that most categories are less than budgeted, and others are kind of close or on par, which shows good cost control for the municipality. The next slide here breaks down expenses by object, which can be found on note 10 of your financial statement package. We're on page 23. It again shows a difference between budget versus actual of $1.76 million. And you can see most of the lines are on par, a little bit less, or less than budgeted, which again is good for cost control. So the next slide here details expenses by object, breaks it down in a pie chart format. Again, the result is very similar to what the municipality has seen in the past. Amortization makes up nearly 25%. Salaries and wages make up almost 22%. Fees and contracted services almost 25%, and materials 25% there. So the next slide talks about some highlights in your financial statement package. The first one being a prior period adjustment for note number 1, which is on page 11. The prior period adjustment relates to some unrecorded tangible capital assets, which were picked up during the year. The unrecorded tangible capital assets relate to portions of Government Road, Mary Avenue, and Proof Line, which have been added to tangible capital assets. This led to an increase in tangible capital assets and accumulated surplus of $772,000. The next highlighted note is the commitments note. So the commitments note details the commitments that the Lambton municipality has in the future, and it all relates to operation and maintenance services for water and wastewater, which can be found on note number 13 or page 24 of your financial statement package. The next highlight is COVID. I mean, we are having this meeting through Zoom, so that'll tell you something that COVID's had quite an impact around the world. So this particular note, which is note number 17, it can be found on page 25, details that COVID has had a significant impact on the global market and will affect Lambton Shores in the next fiscal year. Since the crisis is ongoing, the full potential impact is currently unknown for Lambton Shores. The next highlighted note is the pension note, which is note number 12. So as you can see, the municipality's contribution towards the OMERS pension was $291,000 versus last year's nearly $295,000. So some other statements that are in your financial statement package that you have there relate to the Forest Town Center Business Improvement Area, as well as the trust funds. The Forest Town Business Improvement Area financial statements start on page 32. Details total assets of $19.7 thousand, surplus generated in the current year of $443, and accumulated surplus of $19,000. The next set of financial statements relate to the trust funds for the cemeteries. You'll find, it starts on page 36, and you'll find that it shows an unqualified audit opinion, total assets of about $394,000, and fund balances of almost $390,000. So the trust funds are not included in the Lambton Shores financial statements, which is why they are a separate statement. So the next slide here, I'll pass off to Tyler for him to go through a couple of the points. So go ahead, Tyler.
Perfect. Thanks, Jordan. So each year we're required to issue a final report to those charged with governance, which you ultimately represent as council. This report is a follow-up to our planning report, which was provided to you before the audit started. A copy of the final report was just provided to Janet Ferguson today. I will just summarize a couple of the key points right now for you. As part of the audit, we're required to update our independence since the date of our last letter, which was on February 13th, 2020, prior to the audit. We can still confirm to today's date that we are still independent with respect to Lambton Shores. We also need to disclose any changes in materiality from our planning letter in February. As you can see from the slide in front of you, final materiality did increase from 630,000 in planning to a final materiality of 650,000. This was as a result of actual revenues, which was the materiality base, being greater than initially estimated. We also need to disclose the net effect of any unadjusted misstatements that we found. These totaled $11,975 as the current year effect on surplus, and related ultimately to unadjusted accrued interest on long-term debt, and were offset by unrecorded grant revenue. These have already been discussed with management and were ultimately judged to be immaterial individually and in aggregate, so no adjustment was made. Management representations, we provided to Janet a copy of our management representation letter, which summarizes the representations that we have requested for management during the course of the audit. And as Pete mentioned off the top, we'll need this signed and returned before we can release the final financial statement. A copy is included in the final report that was provided to Janet today. Next, I'll pass it back to Pete to discuss the management letter and to close.
Thanks, Tyler. So we've drafted a management letter and ran it by Janet this afternoon. So we will be submitting that tomorrow. There's no major issues though. So it's just a couple of points we found during our internal control testing. So just to wrap it up, we just want to thank Janet and her staff for their assistance during the audit. It's a little different with COVID, having to do some stuff remotely, but I think it worked out pretty well. So we're open to any questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions? Janet, do you have any comments regarding the audit? Things went smoothly?
Through your worship, yes, things went smoothly. It's been good working with BDO, and it's definitely a team effort here at the finance department.
Okay. Are there any questions, Deputy Mayor Cook?
So just with regard to COVID, is there any recommendations that the municipality should be setting aside a percentage or a dollar amount or something like that of what we're counting for revenue, and just in case we're shortfalling for next year?
I guess you mean you can look at your reserves and they've increased, so you've got a good base there. Your cash is high. Like I'm not sure what your collections have been like since COVID happened. What kind of cost cutting measures you've been doing, but I think you can obviously with $27 million in the bank, I think you can last for a while.
Okay.
Just to follow up, I just know that other municipalities are maybe taking a little more, call it proactive approach to their financing right now. And I know we haven't taken any significant measures yet. And I guess based on the fact that you're saying that we did have good reserves, we probably aren't in a need that we would need to be doing that at this point, I guess, just to making the comment.
Yeah, but I think it's something you'll have to monitor as you go forward and how long this lasts. Like we don't know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Seeing any other questions, or do you have a recommendation that these statements be received and they be approved and presented by BDO Canada? Councillor Sajin, Deputy Mayor Cook. Any further questions? Thank you for the audit. I believe it paints a good picture for Lambton Shores in a good position. So I would ask all in favor of that motion to receive the audit. That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, there's a couple letters that need to be circulated yet and signed, but
we'll get those sent out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
okay. Moving on to item number 10. Correspondence from Blue Water Recycling regarding the transition of the Blue Box program to the full producer responsibility. And this was sent to us by Blue Water Recycling and asked us to support a resolution going forward with that transition. It's quite a lengthy resolution. You don't want me to read it to you, but any questions for that, or is there a motion to move this resolution? There's two of them there, actually. No, it's all one. Councillor Sageman, as our Blue Water rep, you have comments?
Yeah, I'd like to move the resolution just with one addition as recommended by Blue Water Recycling sort of late to this agenda. It adds a whereas. So something that's come to light since this report came out is there is a bit of a loophole in the extended producer responsibility that would allow the manufacturers to opt out of servicing communities that had populations of less than 5,000 people. So our president at Blue Water, Francis, is recommending that we add a whereas that says, whereas the municipality of Lambton Shores is concerned about a recent proposal by the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks that could jeopardize over 135 small, rural, remote, and northern community Blue Box programs across the province, as well as servicing to schools and public spaces. And then there's a that that's added as well. It says that the municipality of Lambton Shores strongly advocates for language to be included in the regulation that ensures municipalities under 5,000 continue to receive Blue Box servicing as was agreed as part of the provincial government's Blue Box mediation, as well as schools and public spaces. I believe Stephanie has that language. It should be added to make the motion complete.
You will move that motion with that. And Stephanie does have the wording. I know you broke up a little bit during the translation. And did I see a number for that? Councillor Wilcox, was that your hand up? Yep.
Yes, Your Worship.
Any questions regarding that resolution? All in favor of that resolution? Carried. Item 10.2 is a piece of correspondence from Christine O'Reilly. regarding gypsy moths, and there's a recommendation that it be received.
I'd like to Your Worship, I'd like to receive that and make a second motion. I printed it out and sent it to the clerk today if she could read it out.
I'm happy to do that. The resolution states that the correspondence from Christine O'Reilly be received and that staff investigate options for gypsy moth control in consultation with other governmental and non-governmental organizations with affected lands in Lambton Shores. And that prior to December 1st, staff prepare a report to council advising of any control plans being proposed by the consulted organization, including opportunities for private property owners to participate in a 2021 gypsy moth control program.
Councillor Sage, are you seconding that?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay.
Speak to it, Your Worship.
Yes,
sorry.
you may. And then Premier Cook, go ahead. Councillor Wilcox. Yep.
Yeah, there's been a ton of correspondence, and I know Councillor Scott has been inundated. I've been inundated with calls, and just wanted staff to have some kind of mechanism to start gathering information and start helping the public. Even if staff comes back with being able to help with supply of pheromone traps right away or something like that. I'm not saying we're putting this off, but to do a major spray campaign, I'm not a spray expert, but my understanding is we missed the timeline this year and we really got to work towards next year. And there's a lot of moving parts to it and a lot of different players that need to be involved, especially the public and some other levels of government. So I have hashed this over, talked with some other councillors, talked with the public, and thought this at least got the ball moving so we can see what we can do for our residents next year and for municipality. That was the reason for it.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Cook and then Councillor Sageman.
Thank you. I guess just, I'm not trying to cut it off at the knees by any means, but Councillor Scott has a notice of motion that's in basically trying to move this forward. So I guess I'm trying to figure out the process here. Are we going to ignore Councillor Scott's notice of motion and go with Councillor Wilcox's motion? Or do we let Councillor Scott have her motion go forward? So the two are kind of in concert with each other. So do we should we just bring Councillor Scott's notice into this motion today rather than defer it to the next meeting? And let's deal with it tonight and make it all just one motion and move on with it, unless Councillor Scott's against going forward with it right now. I think that's the best way to handle this right now.
Procedure-wise, this motion is dealing with a piece of correspondence, which is following procedures, ability to do that. Procedure-wise, for a notice of motion listed on the agenda, it is a notice of motion for the next meeting, unless council chooses to move it forward. Councillor Scott.
We have a speaker coming at the next meeting from Port Franks for the gypsy moths, representing the whole group. I think that basically my motion is similar in a sense to Councillor Wilcox's, but I think that they're slightly different in the presentation that they're doing. And I have no objection to his going forward, but I would have an objection if mine was canceled.
Okay. I don't believe we're canceling that. I believe it will be held at the next meeting. Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I've been going over Councillor Scott's notice of motion, and there's something that maybe should be checked out. In it, it's asked that the municipality supply the residents with, is it BTL?
BTK.
Sorry, BTK. That's a pesticide. And as far as I know, anybody who handles a pesticide in Ontario requires a pesticide license to handle it. How are these residents going to handle it? Like a pesticide kills pests. So it's a dangerous product. And over the last 5 or 6 years, I've had to get one to handle pesticide or you don't get it. So how are they going to handle it?
I think those are questions that need to be asked.
I think that should be rewritten, that motion.
Point of order, Your Worship. We're not talking about that notice of motion. We're talking about the previous motion right now. That motion doesn't come till next meeting. Just so we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Councillor Sageman, I believe you had your comment.
Yeah, I agree that we've got a bit of an issue going on in Lambton Shores with gypsy moths, not just in Port Franks. My driving around in the last week has shown me that Deer Run has at least as bad a condition in most of the Highway 21 corridor. I'm sure that staff will address in the report how we're going to deal with this on private lands, given that we don't normally do remediation on private lands. I think that I'd like to see something that talks about facilitating a spray. I know that many of the larger landowners along the 21 corridor are arranging their own spray programs. And that I think we've passed the prime of being able to do anything about it this year. But to be prepared for next year, I like the timeline of having a report by and something about a plan by December. So I appreciate the motion from Councillor Wilcox on this matter.
Okay. So just so we're clear, Councillor Scott's motion will be dealt with at the next meeting, and this motion that's here, I will read it again so everybody's clear. It was moved by Councillor Wilcox and seconded by Councillor Sageman, I believe. Correct. The correspondence from Christine O'Reilly be received. That staff investigate options for gypsy moth control in consultation with other governmental and non-governmental organizations with affected lands and Lambton Shores, and that prior to December 1st, staff prepare a report to council advising of any control plans being proposed by the consulted organizations, including opportunities for private property owners to participate in the 2021 Gypsy Moth Control Program. If there are no other questions, I'm going to ask for vote on that motion.
I have a question, Your Honor, Your Worship.
Go ahead.
Is that date appropriate, Councillor Wilcox, the 1st of December? Is that not too early?
No.
For an egg count?
Well, they lay the eggs in the fall, is my understanding, and we need to get it in before budget time, so we have that information. So I'm hoping staff can gather all the information they need by that time.
Good.
So we can make a decision moving forward,
Yep.
not last minute.
Yeah,
So we
I
have
just
plenty of
wanted
time
accurate.
to get this handled.
Yeah, I just want to make sure it's accurate, that's all. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, Deputy Mayor.
So, thank you, Worship. So just going back through Councillor Scott's motion, and again, I'm hoping we're not just trying to cut it off at the knees, but if she said she's got a speaker coming to the next meeting, if we're moving forward on a motion for gypsy moths right now, it would seem kind of redundant to have a speaker come to tell us we need to do something about gypsy moths if we're already acting on it. I'm not trying to defer or take away from anybody's motion. I'm just trying to figure out, again, the process just, I find it just kind of odd that, we're just going to jump ahead with a motion now, even though it's proper through correspondence, when we already had a notice of motion sitting on the floor that we could have done something with to begin with. Sorry.
Thanks for those comments. Councillor Sageman.
Can't hear you.
Muted.
Just a follow-up, just something that Councillor Wilcox said just made me think of it. He mentioned being ready for budget time for something here. Is it the intention that you're looking for the municipality to pay for the spraying on private lands?
I'm looking for advice from staff in a report.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, Councillor Scott.
I think that the motion that I've put forward is a good one to still do. This one that is being put forward as of Christine is just sort of to me is just a first step into the future what my motion is about. And just for the record, it's other municipalities that are buying the product and selling to customers, and they don't have pesticide licenses.
Okay, we'll deal with that. I am going to call the question on this motion. We all understand it's asking for consultation and preparedness going forward with different landowners and organizations. All in favor of that motion? Opposed? That is carried. Okay. And this is back to
Yes.
17, subdivision agreement and draft plan approval for abandoned developments, Glen Estate subdivision in Arcona. And there's a recommendation there that it be received and that the draft plan be approved and the bylaw authorizing execution be approved. Moved by Deputy Warden Cook, seconded by Councillor Dodge. Questions regarding this application? Deputy Mayor Cook.
Thank you. I don't know who can answer the question. It looks like they've got an access. They paid for an access off of Townsend Line sometime down in the future. Is there a timing for that particular road access, or is it just a wish list that they're putting out there right now?
Through the mayor. Through the mayor, the provision of that secondary access will depend on the intervening property owner, whether they wish to develop their lands or not.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions regarding this? All in favor? Or is that a question, Councillor Marsh?
I have a question, Your Worship. This
ahead.
is to Will. When do you think this might start, the building?
The previous owner, there's obviously there's been quite a few delays with previous owners. This owner seems quite in earnest to get moving soon. They have ministry clearance now on the archaeological. And my sense is that they do wish to move forward with this project in the near future.
Okay.
Thank you.
All in favor of that? Carried. Thank you very much. 10.4. Site plan approval application for 9917 Northville Crescent. This is a site plan approval for Storage MD Inc. Recommendation that it be approved and bylaw 35 be approved. Councillor Dodge, second by Deputy Mayor Cook. Any questions regarding this application? Councillor Sageman.
Yes, Your Worship. Just something we had talked about when this project came forth initially was buffering and planting sort of on the Highway 21 side or something to sort of soften the appearance of the thing. Has that been addressed in this site plan report? I see some trees on the drawing here. I just don't know if the language is in there or not. Through you to our planner, probably.
Through the mayor, the applicant indicated that he had called a number of landscaping companies, and based on the way the season has gone with them due to COVID, the late start, he has not been very successful in getting any response from the landscaping company. So the agreement indicates that a landscape plan will have to be submitted for subsequent approval. The intent is not to do an immaculate landscape plan or to try to hide the fact that there are storage units there, but certainly something to provide some highlights on the property. The existing hedge along the one side provides very good screening in that direction. On another side, backing onto the residential lot, the site plan, I apologize, the scale doesn't allow great legibility, but there is a plan for a new cedar hedge along that lot line. The other lot line is another commercial use, so would not have a hedge. So that is what is proposed in terms of landscaping and screening. The other aspect in terms of relation to the highway is that last building closest to the highway would have a different design to the facade.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so they will submit a landscape plan at some point. I understand that there is some difficulty getting stuff from contractors right now with COVID. That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions regarding this site plan? Did we get a mover and a seconder? Yeah. Yep. I'm in favor of that motion. That's carried. Thank you. Thank you for that. I believe that's all for planning. Thank you, Will. Move along to community service. Report number 8 regarding the Grand Bend, Ontario Street Trunk Sewer. The memorandum of understanding is a recommendation there regarding the Ontario Street Trunk Sewer be received, and that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign the attached memorandum between Lambton Shores and South Jordan regarding the construction of trunk sewer lines. Moved by Councillor Marsh, seconded by Councillor Sageman. Any questions regarding that? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. 10.6 is the capital budget tar and chip resurfacing tender award. And there's a recommendation there for the tender from Cornell Construction. Anyone prepared to move that recommendation? Councillor Dodge, second by Deputy Mayor Cook. Any questions regarding that? Deputy Mayor Cook.
Just, I'm not familiar with the construction company. Have we worked with these folks before? Are they familiar to our operations people?
Through you, your worship. Yes, we have worked with them before. They were the company that did the work last year. And as I noted in there, they're the only ones that bid. So, but yes, we are familiar with them.
I believe it said here that we're doing a little different program with a finer surface and preparation prior to the coating.
So yes, through you, your worship. So we kind of looked at last year's program, what we did. Obviously, we heard some feedback on it, and we've tried to adjust our program a little bit this year to stay with the tar and chip that offers the affordability, but try and get a better surface. So this stone that we're going to use this year is a much finer stone. And we went and looked at some other municipalities that have used it on some of their roads, and I think it'll provide us with a better surface. We've also put a fair bit more requirements in there for the contractor for preparation of the existing surface. So there's a few things that we're going to do this year that are going to be different, and try and show that we still think tar and chip will work in these areas.
Okay. Other questions? Did I see Councillor McGuire?
No.
Okay. We did. Must be getting tired. All in favor of that recommendation? That is carried. Thank you. The municipal trunk sewer tender award. Recommendation that be received, and Burnham Excavating at the tender price, and additional funds be taken from the wastewater reserve and that the mayor and clerk sign upon receiving a signed copy of the memorandum of understanding. So, is there a motion for that recommendation? Councillor McGuire, seconded by Councillor Pageman. Any questions regarding that? Seeing none, all in favor of that? Carried, thank you. Good to see. Item 10.8, purchase municipal property. There's a recommendation there that it be received and that the requester be advised that the municipality has no closing of the road allowance at this time. The recommendation moved by Councillor Sageman, second by Councillor Wilcox. Any questions regarding that? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item 11 is the notice of motion. We've had a little discussion about this.
We've got the addition, Your Worship.
Okay, yes. Thank you. We have a recommendation. We have the additional report that was added on the weekend from the CAO regarding the spring 2020 outbreak of gypsy moth, and we're asking the recommendation that this be received. There was a lot of work went into this and the additional information that was attached onto the website. I think this will all be useful as we go forward with this, so I would ask that this report be received. Councillor Scott, are you moving that?
I'd like to table that report until the July meeting. I think it's a report that has had a lot of work done, but I think it would pertain to what we're going to discuss on my motion.
Is there a seconder for the tabling motion?
Second.
Councillor Dodge, second. All in favor of tabling? There's no discussion on a tabling motion. Those in favor of tabling that report? Those opposed? That motion to table is lost. So we need a motion to receive that report. Councillor Sageman, second by Councillor McGuire. Questions receiving that for information? Councillor Sageman, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I really appreciate the extensive background that went into this report. I know that there was some thoughts in the community, maybe we weren't looking at this problem, but this report demonstrates, I think, quite effectively that there was a great deal of time spent on looking at the problem and trying to move forward for next year. So I just want to make sure that we mentioned that right now. Thank you.
I would concur with that. We are getting information gathered. Councillor Wilcox.
Well, and I understand why we wanted to table it to the next meeting, but the information will still be available at the next meeting. And I don't think it's going to diminish the speaker that we've got coming, because I think the more information we get moving forward here, the better off it'll be. But it's at least demonstrated that staff is aware. CEO done a good job on just giving us some information there, but it doesn't give us a solution. And that's what we got to work on from here. And I know Councillor Scott's wanting to get to a solution as soon as we can. So so the emails and the phone calls stop going to her and to some other councillors too. So looking forward to the next meeting also.
Okay. Thank you. All in favor of receiving that report information? Opposed? That is carried as well. Item number 11 is a notice of motion that will be heard on the July 14th council meeting. I don't believe we have any emergent issues before us. Bylaws and resolutions. Councillor Dodge, bylaws 28 through 40. Read the first, second, and third time, seconded by Councillor Sageman. All in favor of those bylaws? That's carried. Thank you very much. And this is the motion that I don't know whether we can close this meeting. This is always the Councillor Goodhand's motion. I talked with Sarah Jane and I thought we would have to continue meeting because of that motion, but I would ask someone to step up and take that motion. And Councillor Dodge, it's appropriate. Thank you for that motion to adjourn. Second by Councillor Wilcox. All in favor of that? Thank you very much. A lot of business done at this meeting, a good meeting. Interesting how the public meetings can be held. I hope everyone followed through, and we will have our next meeting on July 14th.
I believe that's the date.
Any chance that'll be in a room, Mr. Mayor?
I doubt we'll be moved to a stage 3 by then, but we will if we can.
It is the 14th.
14th of July. Thank you very much. Thank you to those that have watched and on the live streaming. Stay safe out there, and those that are coming to the beach, follow the rules. We don't want to have to close it.